Hi, welcome back to my channel, Rethink ADHD. And I know I said I wasn't gonna get too much into the diagnostics and all of that stuff for ADHD through this channel, but actually in reflecting, that's kind of a loss because that is my background. So I'm actually gonna talk about what it takes to be diagnosed with ADHD. I will also say there's like a million videos out there about this. So this doesn't have to be your source of truth. If you want, you can view a bunch of different things that are out there. As a medical doctor, I'm going to tell you what your clinician is going to use. Some of those channels may or may not stick to the diagnostic manual. First things first, who would diagnose you with ADHD? This can vary a lot depending on your state or your country, but here in the United States, for the most part, it's going to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist or even your primary care doctor. Believe it or not, primary care doctors are they are diagnosing the majority of mental illnesses and learning disabilities. They are kind of the first line defense. I was like, that's not real because we're not gonna get into that. But in theory, we should all have a primary care provider who is the main arbiter or guider of our health. And your primary care provider can diagnose your ADHD and they can treat your ADHD. So I don't want folks to listen to this video and think, okay, I need to talk to a psychiatrist, because actually your psychiatrist, typically what they're going to be doing is managing your medications and making sure you're on the right thing. But your primary care doctor, meaning your family medicine doctor, your internal medicine doctor, maybe even your OBGYN, depending upon where you are, those folks can diagnose your ADHD just as well as the psychiatrist. So the first step would be to go and schedule an appointment to see your doctor or your psychologist. There are, other ranges of being a clinician. So you can have your clinical social workers, your therapists, your counselors. Depending on your state, these folks can also diagnose you with different illnesses or learning disabilities. But I don't know enough about all the states to know that. So I would say if you're unsure, you can either Google your state and see what the requirements are for you from a diagnostic standpoint. Or you can just schedule to see your doctor and completely skip that step altogether. So you'll go to your clinician, and typically folks ask me, like, is there a specific test for ADHD that they're gonna give me? And the short answer is no, not really. There are different assessments your clinician can use that will ask you similar questions to what we'll talk about, but it's not required. You can really diagnose ADHD through conversation. So they'll ask you things about your history, about your childhood, about your symptoms, about where those symptoms are taking place, and just how they're impacting your life overall. And so when you go to your doctor, be prepared to tell your story. So you've gone to your doctor, there isn't any one test, they're gonna ask you a bunch of questions. And so here we start talking about ADHD itself, and what is it, and how do we evaluate it? ADHD is divided into 3 different types. A lot of people don't know that there are three different types, but there are. So there's the inattentive type, there's the hyperactive type, and there's the combined type, which is a combination of both the inattentive and the hyperactive types. The combined type is actually the most common type of ADHD. So it's very likely, if you are experiencing symptoms of ADHD, that is your bucket in terms of being diagnosed. And so what your clinician is going to use to diagnose you is something called the DSM-5. It's a diagnostic manual, and it has all of the requirements to be diagnosed with a variety of different mental illnesses, ranging from anxiety all the way up to like schizophrenia, bipolar, and things like that. So the manual is going to structure how long do you have to have the symptoms, what symptoms do you have to have, and how do we evaluate people based upon their age. And so within the DSM, being 16 and younger is considered childhood, and above that is adulthood. So if you're 17, 18, and so on, you're going to be evaluated as an adult with ADHD. So that's all included in the DSM. This is not secret squirrel stuff. You can Google the DSM online. You can buy your own copy. You can look at the CDC's recommendation, which I am going to link down here for your further reading. But it's not secret stuff. The things and the kinds of questions your doctor or your clinician is going to ask you are public. You could literally read them in advance if you're nervous to know kind of what that conversation may be like. So there are two numbers, and to make it easier to remember, there are two numbers-ish that I think would be helpful for you to remember what is required for a diagnosis of ADHD. Those numbers are 5 and 6. So for children and adults, we're looking at symptoms that have lasted for at least 6 months. So 6. So this isn't something like, you had a bunch of, coffee and you come in and you're feeling a little jittery and this just happened a few seconds ago. This is something that has been an ongoing part of your lived experience. That's what the clinician is trying to better understand. So we're looking at 6 months, so the number 6. And then for children, we're looking for 6 symptoms from either one of the separate categories, so hyperactive or inattentive, or a combination that adds up to 6 to be diagnosed as combined type ADHD. So for kids, it's 6 and 6 symptoms from either category, from one category, or 6 as a combined to be diagnosed as combined type over the course of 6 months. And then for adults, we're looking a little bit different. So this is the first time we use the number 5. For adults, and the requirement is 5 symptoms. So either 5 symptoms from our inattentive or 5 symptoms from our hyperactive, or a combination of symptoms that add up to 5 to be categorized as our combined type. So you just need one less symptom from when you're an adult, meaning you're over the age of 16. The other thing, when you're a child in particular, as I mentioned, clinicians are wanting to know, is this something that is a major part of your life? Meaning we can rule out there being just environmental factors that are impacting this. A large part of what your doctor is going to do specifically when they're diagnosing mental illnesses or learning disabilities, is try to make sure there's no other explanation for the illness. So for children, you'll hear the requirement that the child or experience the symptoms in 2 or more different settings. So this is happening at school, and this is happening at home. This is happening at home, and this is happening at church. It needs to be 2 different settings, because this isn't about, the kid is just kind of busy at school. This is, in general, this is how they are in multiple different environments in their life. So funny, you're gonna hear my blinds roll up automatically. I forget that they're on a timer and they are gonna roll up. So while that's happening, I'm gonna look down, because the next thing that we need to talk about are the symptoms that fall in each individual bucket. When you look at the inattentive type, and I'm gonna read it from here, from the CDC's website, because I don't remember them offhand. And honestly, with an ADHD brain, the likelihood of you remembering them is super small. So do yourself a favor, work with your brain, not against your brain. So for your inattentive types, you're looking at things like the following: often fails to give close attention to details, makes careless mistakes in schoolwork, at work, or with other activities, often has trouble holding attention on tasks or play activities, often has trouble organizing tasks and activities. That's getting back to that lack of executive functioning. We'll talk about that. What does that even mean? I think people use that term and we don't even know, many folks don't even know what that really means. So we'll talk about that. Easily distracted, forgetful, they lose things. They are reluctant or avoid tasks that require mental effort over a long period of time, such as schoolwork or homework. The list goes on. I won't read the whole list. I'm going to link down below to the official diagnostic criteria, and you can read them yourself. So that was for the inattentive type. I think when you look at the inattentive type between children and adults, these can look very similar. So, an adult may have a hard time planning out their day. They may have a hard time keeping their home organized. They may have a hard time keeping up with different things. Now, I want to stress, this is not that one time last week when you lost your keys, or even that you often lose your keys, because many of us lose our keys. That's why they created the things like Tile and all those other products. Many of us lose our keys. This is not just like a one-time thing. This is a pervasive experience across your life. You're not just losing your keys, you're misplacing a variety of different things. You're having a hard time keeping up with bills. So what we don't talk about enough is that when you become an adult, the need for executive functioning just increases and increases. You have to coordinate your bills. You have to get to work on time. You have to figure out what you're going to wear. Oftentimes you're balancing being a spouse or a parent or, just your individual self. So as an adult, life gets a lot more complex, and you start to really see that challenge of executive functioning really start to show. So definitely if you're an adult and you're thinking, am I an inattentive type? Take a look at this list. And honestly, if you're anything like my ADHD was, just look around your room. It'll tell you a lot about executive functioning and planning of life. So the thing that I think I want to highlight most here with inattentive type as it relates to being an adult is that sometimes you can actually see folks with ADHD have issues with managing their money, because managing your money requires planning, it requires a budget, it requires tracking. It requires you to remember that you're doing that. And so you can oftentimes see people with ADHD struggling financially because they're unable to balance a lot of those obligations just because of the way their brain works. So that's inattentive type. And then the second type is hyperactivity. Again, I'm gonna look down because ain't no way. And so you'll see here symptoms like often fidgets with or taps hands or feet or squirms in the seat, often runs about or climbs in situations where it's not appropriate, often unable to play or take part in leisure activities, talks excessively. The biggest distinction here that I would say between adults and children is obviously once you become an adult, you realize you can't just run around climbing on things because you feel like it. So could you imagine that, just being in Target and someone's climbing on the shelf and they're like 40 years old? You're like, what's happening here? Do we need to talk about it? But so as an adult, hyperactivity can look very different than if you were a kid, because at that point we have, through a series of social molding and modeling and just like honestly critical feedback, figured out that we can't just bolt around the room every 5 seconds. What it may look like for adults, again, going back to that financial piece, is impulsivity. And just like an uncomfortable feeling when you have to sit still. Neurotypical folks, they can sit still. They might be bored, but they can sit still. For someone with ADHD brain, this can be excruciating. It can feel like you're just barely hanging on in that 30-minute meeting. And it can mean that you feel tired, more tired at the end of your day, because you're having to focus so hard on keeping yourself composed so you don't look C-word crazy. So hyperactivity can look very different for folks that are adults that are being evaluated, but it can look like impulsivity. And again, this goes back to that financial piece where you're spending your money because you feel like it and you haven't really thought about the financial consequences of doing that or making that purchase, and you get in trouble. And so when you're talking to your clinician, and there's some brilliant clinicians out there, they'll, if you're an adult, probably dive into some of those things you wouldn't even think about that are challenging with ADHD. If you remember, I'd like to think back in time. If you remember back in the day, and this is not at all saying these things are okay, but I remember hearing stories about mothers who would accidentally leave their kid in a store or forget their kid somewhere, and everyone on the internet would be like, oh, you're such a bad parent. How do you forget a whole child? That is ADHD brain classic. Yes, to the neurotypical brain, it's like, how in the world did you forget that? You came in with a human, you left with no human. You didn't notice that there was no human with you. That is ADHD brain in and of itself. So if you're a parent and you're going to be evaluated, tell those stories of things that you probably feel a lot of shame about, you're probably embarrassed to admit, but they are part of your lived experience. And you'll be surprised, and we'll talk about that as part of this channel, how much of that can be explained by ADHD. So hyperactivity is going to look a little different for our adults. Usually what they're going to try to do is eliminate any other explanations for why this is happening to you. Again, combined type is the most common type, and the symptoms for adults, I think the key takeaway is combined type is the most common type. The symptoms for adults may look a little different. For the purposes of this channel, we will talk about what it's like to be an adult, specifically an adult person of color, and having ADHD, and also there are some things about like being LGBT and how that also is a complicated relationship sometimes. But needless to say, if you're an adult and you're looking at the diagnostic criteria for kids, keep in mind that it may look very different for you because you have it hopefully, maybe, sort of, fingers crossed, figured out that you cannot climb on shelves in Target. But you know what? It's okay. If I see you climbing on a shelf in Target, I'm going to be like, I see you in solidarity. And I'm going to be hoping that you get the help that you need. So that's kind of the diagnostic requirements for ADHD. After you're diagnosed, your clinician will try to help create a treatment plan for you. There are medications that you can use for ADHD, and there are non-medication treatments that you can use for ADHD. I have used both, and what I have found works best for me is actually a combination of the two. So we'll talk a little bit about what's worked for me. We'll talk about why different medications are at work and what the theories around why they work are. But I think that's the bulk of it if you want to understand how ADHD is diagnosed. If this video was helpful, please share it with someone that you know. Like, comment, subscribe to the channel, and comment below any questions that you have. I know that was like a really overview of what it means to be diagnosed with ADHD, but I've intentionally kept it very objective because everyone's symptoms can be a little bit different. And this is where the comment section is really helpful, because if you comment that you're having a certain experience, then I can comment back to you what I think and what my thoughts are in terms of what you should do next. And we can have a fuller conversation about it. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you next Sunday. Bye.